All right, so in this video, we're going to react to the latest release of the AP Preseason Top 25.
So in today's video, we are going to react and talk about the AP Top 25 preseason poll that's just been released. And instantly, my instant reaction, in my opinion, is that Oklahoma is too high and that Georgia is too low.
I can agree with that. But first of all, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Cam Smith, with the American Senior Benefits Insurance Company. Any insurance needs you need, go see him. He'll get you right. But also, he has a internet radio station called Just Jesus Network Radio, Christian radio station, non-stop commercial-free radio. Our boy Dave is on it.
Go give him a listen.
Listen to me at 8:30 Saturday mornings, and you can even go on there and listen. If it's not Saturday, you can listen to my most previous thing on there.
So, in all seriousness, we really appreciate it, Cam.
Really appreciate Cam, and definitely check him out. And Cam is an honest guy and a Christian guy who's
he'll get you right.
He'll definitely
and all the links for that will be left in the description below.
No doubt. Yep. So, no, I agree with you. And Georgia being too low and Oklahoma too high. I don't hate the Georgia ranking. I really don't. As a Georgia fan, top 5 is and number 5 is fair. Basically, I feel like the notion is for Georgia, prove to us that you have a better offense, and until they do, I can accept that. But the thing with Oklahoma is putting them at 2 makes no sense to me.
I agree with that entirely.
Either just pretty much have the guts to say we think Oklahoma's the best team in the nation and put them at number 1, or drop them out of the top 3.
Well, I think from the surface, the ranking where Georgia's at 5 is fair if you're basing it solely off of last season. Because would y'all lose 2 games last year, I believe it was. And if that's what you're basing it off of, that's fair. But if you're basing it off of last year, Oklahoma's definitely not number 2 because they also lost 2 games. And your offense, Georgia's offense, looked a whole lot better in the later part of the season. And Oklahoma's defense, where they struggled, looked a whole lot better. But if you're basing it off of last season, I think it's fair to put Georgia at 5. But if you're basing it on coming into this season, as we've said multiple times, I believe on paper, Georgia's probably the most complete team coming into the season. And I would definitely put them over Oklahoma. The reason I'm not buying necessarily into the Oklahoma hype, I think they're no doubt a playoff caliber team. And by the end of the year, they can prove me wrong. You got Alex Grinch, one of the best defensive coordinators in college football, and you've definitely seen a step up with Oklahoma's defense since he's become their coordinator. But I've got to see it first.
I agree.
Just because your defense is better, your defense has been so bad, anything is pretty much better. Any sort of defensive product you put on the field, and I've got to see it before I start putting Oklahoma at that caliber, second in the country, and get them all that high.
I agree, and that's the thing is, like I said, if they're good enough to be number 2, then just put them at 1. And in my opinion,
I think the reason, like we've said it many times, the reason why they put Bama at number 1, what do we always say?
The Bama factor.
Bama factor.
And that's the reality, and that's what I preach.
Right, and coming off a national championship last year, they've replaced some people, but it's still Bama, and that's why.
And I'm fine with
that. And I'm fine with that as well.
But on paper, is Bama the best team?
One thing that shocks
coming into this season, probably not.
Right. One thing that shocks me as we look at this is that Georgia received more first place votes than Ohio State did. But yet they still put Georgia at number 5 and put Ohio State at number 1.
Number 4.
Yeah, sorry, at 4. But if you look at it, as we've said, Georgia is possibly the most complete team on paper. But yet Ohio State is replacing multiple people, including their quarterback. And like I said, I think if you look at it from a standpoint of this year, then I don't see why they didn't put Georgia at number 4 at least.
And like we said, I'm more than okay with Alabama being number 1 solely because at this point, though they are replacing a lot, they're pretty much the majority of their offense. I at this point have so much belief in Nick Saban, his ability to evaluate and his ability to develop, that I no doubt believe that Alabama's going to be a top 2, probably number 1 team in the country, like they are every year.
Is that you've got 3 teams in the top 3? Or 4 rather, that are replacing their quarterback, and matter of fact, and their running back. And yet you have them so high. I mean, those are arguably 2 of the most important. No doubt, quarterback is, and I don't care what anybody says, it's the most important position on the field.
Absolutely.
But running back is up there, and it's a skill position. And both teams, and all 3, as far as Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson, are replacing that. And that just kind of blows my mind. To put them I firmly believe Georgia on paper is better than Ohio State.
Yeah, I do too.
I think Georgia on paper is better than Oklahoma, and I really think on paper Georgia's the best team in the nation. But I'm a Georgia fan, and like I said, I'm perfectly fine with the 5 rating. I just don't get the Oklahoma at 2.
And not only that, kind of like you just mentioned about how 3 out of the top 4 are replacing quarterbacks, are replacing running backs. And now I know Texas A&M, they get their running back, and Isaiah Spiller, one of the best backs in the country, and they're replacing some other pieces, and they obviously lose Kellen Mond. Yet they finished the season last year at 5, and the biggest piece that they're really losing is Kellen Mond. Yet you see Clemson losing a lot. You see Ohio State losing a lot. You see Oklahoma losing some pieces as well. Yet they kind of bumped Texas A&M a bit back. Yet they kept the other teams at the top, and I assume that's solely probably because Texas A&M's yet to prove that they can stay at that level consistently.
One team that shocks me inside the top 10, and I think they're deserving of it, is Cincinnati at number 8.
I like that.
No, I like it too.
After going undefeated last year until they got to the bowl game against Georgia, playing a good game against Georgia, hanging in there tough, I think they're very deserving of that number 8 spot. Maybe even put them above Iowa State at number 7.
I was going to say that. On paper, I'd take Cincinnati over A&M.
And I love Matt Campbell.
It'd be a good game.
Yeah, and I love Matt Campbell, the head coach of Iowa State. He's got a great ball club year in and year out. They tend to give Oklahoma a run for their money at least every other year.
Anybody that pretty much shows up with all rostered guys can beat Oklahoma during the regular season.
100%, absolutely. But like you said, the Cincinnati ranking, I love it. I think Cincinnati. I think Desmond Ridder is one of the better quarterbacks in college football. I think Luke Fickell is one of the better coaches in college football. And like we mentioned before, this year they're going to have 2 big Power 5 teams that they're going to play on their schedule.
Right.
And if Cincinnati were to run the table and go undefeated, there's a dang good chance they're in the playoffs.
What about North Carolina though? I mean, North Carolina, then putting North Carolina behind Notre Dame.
I like North Carolina in the top 10.
I do too.
But I like North Carolina over Notre Dame.
I do too.
What does Notre Dame have this year?
Especially with
their defense will be strong, but losing Ian Book,
for sure.
I believe Brian Kelly just named. I can't think of his name. It was the transfer from Wisconsin.
He just named him the starter. Yep.
But like you said, obviously Notre Dame coming off the playoff appearance last year, they had a great game. But I agree. I think North Carolina's ceiling's higher. But I also believe that Notre Dame's probably going to be that more consistent team. I believe North Carolina coming out week 1 against right now an average Virginia Tech team in Blacksburg. That's a trap game. As much hype as North Carolina's getting, and I'm one of them. I think North Carolina's going to be a great team.
Right.
It would not surprise me to see them slip up and lose week 1 in Blacksburg at Virginia Tech. So I understand the ranking, and I honestly think that's about a perfect rating for North Carolina.
No, I agree. And the thing is that I have to remember is that the coaches do go in effect as well.
Right.
And I like at Bama number 1, you got Nick Saban.
Right.
And in Notre Dame, you have Brian Kelly, who has all the experience in the world and has been there and done that. So as far as this whole really top 25 goes, especially the top 10, I'm not really at odds with anything. Right. There's some changes I would make.
Right.
But it's all preseason. You really don't know what's going to happen.
And I'll tell you what, another team that I think is a little bit high is Florida.
Yeah.
I think Florida is a top 20 team, no doubt. And Florida,
I'd probably have them at like 17 or 18.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't have them quite as high as they do, just because we saw how their defense was last year, and they're losing their 2 most important pieces to their offense, that being Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts.
Right. Yep.
And we saw what their offense looked like without them 2 guys in the lineup, and it was a bit shaky at times. Now, granted, you're
a little bit terrible.
I mean, you're having to plug in some more inexperienced guys and stuff like that. But losing those 2 pieces, we saw how their defense was absolute. I mean, and all that, it was hot garbage last year.
Yeah.
And they're still that high. I think Florida's got potential to surprise some teams, to surprise some people. But I also think they got the potential to really fall off and have a tough year this season.
Well, no doubt. And as we've said in other videos, Florida's whole season rests on Emory Jones and what he is and whether or not he improves.
Right.
And if he does, let's just say he jumps into like a top 10 quarterback role, you can see Florida be a top 10 team. But if he plays the way he's played up to this point, Florida may not even be a top 25 team, all things said and done.
I agree.
I can agree. Yeah, for sure.
And so that's the thing. You can't convince me Florida's a top 13 or even a 15 team. You give me Miami over them, give me USC over them, give me LSU, Indiana, even Iowa. I'll take over them.
And I'll tell you a little bit. Another surprising thing to me is seeing Indiana below Wisconsin. Indiana was in the Big Ten championship with Michael Penix Jr. at quarterback, one of the better quarterbacks in college football, and they gave Ohio State everything they wanted and then some last year when they played them. And I think a lot of that has to do with really, obviously, the Big Ten, their season was cut short with COVID. I believe, there's only 6 regular season games. In Wisconsin, I think they had like 2 of those games canceled, so they only had like 4 games.
Right.
And the few games we saw him play with Graham Mertz at quarterback, I believe he was a true freshman last year. He looked really good, and that's one of those. Wisconsin's one of those teams that they always have a really good team. They just never have a quarterback. And Graham Mertz seems to potentially be that guy, and that might be one of the main reasons that they're at 12 and they're
He's
higher.
definitely a guy with potential. But Mad, in my opinion, there's a lot of disrespect in Indiana here.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
And I hate it for the Cincinnati fans, but I genuinely believe I think they knock off Notre Dame.
Yeah.
I do, but I think Indiana goes and plays Cincinnati with something to prove.
Yeah, and they could make a big statement in week 1 against Iowa. At Iowa,
that's going to be we should preview that.
Yeah,
and
that'll be a fun game to watch for sure.
That's going to be a good one. And is that a 12:00 game or is that a night game? I don't know if y'all do that.
I'll look it up for you.
But so I think there's a lot of disrespect in it. You can't convince me that Indiana's not better than Florida right now.
Yeah, and 100%. Well, at the same time, and I do agree with that, but I'd be lying if I said I knew the ins and outs of Indiana. So I don't know exactly what they lose, but I know they get their most important piece back in being Michael Penix Jr.
Absolutely.
And I watched him a decent bit last year just to watch him play Ohio State and a couple other games. And they were good. I mean, they had a legit defense. They gave Justin Fields fits, and I agree. I think they're being slightly disrespected being at 17.
That's a 3:30 game.
Okay.
In Indiana and Iowa.
So I'll have to be hitting that previous button between Alabama and Miami.
If
I'm at the house, maybe in Charlotte. Possibly.
Might be. Maybe.
For sure.
But no, I think there's some disrespect in Indiana. I think that would be my preseason predictions, and hopefully I didn't just ruin like a prediction video. But I think Cincinnati can knock off Notre Dame, and I think they will. But I think Indiana, when they line up against Cincinnati, especially if they're undefeated, I think they say, we've got something to prove, and we're going to do it. Now, I could be wrong. They could get knocked off week 1, and we'll see how it plays out.
I was really shocked how high they had, and not because they don't deserve it, just because of how of the caliber team in the brand of Coastal Carolina. At number 22.
Right.
I mean, I expected top 25 at maybe like 24 or 25, but have them up at 22, I think speaks very highly of their coaching staff and their team they built.
Well, and the thing is, I think they could argue to be higher.
Yeah.
I would take them over Texas right now.
I would too. Probably Washington as well, honestly.
I agree. And they're, once again, I think they're better than Florida.
Yeah. And I mean,
Florida's at what, 13?
Yeah, I mean, you got to think with Coastal Carolina, we saw what they did last year. We saw how they did when they played a good team in BYU. They get Grayson McCall back, who's, again, I know we say it a lot, the quarterback depth in college football is really deep this year. Again, another one of those better quarterbacks in college football in Grayson McCall. We've seen their coach staff, their head coach, his name slips my mind, but he's been doing great things at Coastal Carolina. And I agree. I could see you putting them over Texas, Washington. You got to think Penn State last year really struggled. I think they won like 1 or 2 games last year. No, I think Penn State's going to have a resurgence, going to have a comeback type season this year, no doubt. But, I mean, basing it off of last year, Penn State had a rough year, and Coastal Carolina didn't. I mean, they had a very good, solid year, and I could see you putting them at 19 instead of 22.
I agree. And if you're a Coastal Carolina fan, you're probably fine with that.
Right.
You are.
But it's just, I mean, sometimes you just wonder, like, how much does the brand affect this?
Right.
Because I just don't think Texas is better than them right now. And when you return an elite quarterback, you're a step ahead of most people.
Right.
Yep.
And if you're replacing your quarterback, now don't get me wrong. Can a guy like Bryce Young, can DJ Uiagalelei, can they come out and be straight stars? Absolutely.
100%.
No doubt in my mind. And some of these newcomers are going to be, whether it's Haynes King from A&M, whether it's DJ out of Clemson.
Or Max Johnson at LSU.
Exactly. And just because you have a new quarterback doesn't mean you have a bad quarterback.
Right.
But if you're Texas, what is this new guy going to do that Sam Ehlinger didn't?
Right.
And I just don't see how right now on paper they're better.
And I believe right now Casey Thompson at Texas is supposed to be the starter, and he's got a lot of hype. But I was watching one video, and I can't think of the name of the backup, but he's getting a lot of it's a close competition between him and Casey Thompson. But another interesting team to me is Louisiana Lafayette.
Yeah.
Because not only that are they 23, Texas is 21. They play week 1.
Yep.
So let's say Louisiana Lafayette comes out there, beats
hilarious.
Texas pretty good. That instantly knocks Texas right out of the top 25. Steve Sarkisian's first year being the head coach there. And Louisiana Lafayette, and again, I'd be lying if I said I knew a ton about them, but they're legit. They're not just one of those group of 5 teams that can just run the table. I mean, they can play with anybody in the country.
Are there only 2 Group of 5 teams in the top 25?
I believe so. Just Coastal and
Coastal, at 20.
Or Cincinnati's up there.
Or Cincinnati. That's right.
Yeah, so there's only 3.
So there's 3. Yeah.
And it's obvious that Cincinnati has set themselves apart in the Group of 5.
Right, for sure.
And so that's interesting to see. And you can argue so much of these Group of 5 teams, and that speaks, in my opinion, strictly of the coaching staff there, and what's going on there with these guys. And so overall, is this a bad top 25?
No. But I definitely expect week 2 to be a lot different because you've got multiple, I think 5 or 6 top 25 matchups.
Well, I'm going to tell you.
And you do week 1 really too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Either Georgia or Clemson's going to jump.
Right.
Yep. I mean, you got the Georgia Clemson game.
One of them's going to drop. One of them's going to jump.
Right. You've got, and I think even the loser of that game doesn't drop out of the top 10.
Shouldn't.
No, they definitely.
Especially
won't.
if it's a close game.
I can see them dropping to like 6.
Max
6 or
honestly.
7. Well, I guess it depends on who loses.
Because you got to think there's still a lot of teams that are playing cupcakes. Week
this
1.
is a really solid week 1 though.
Oh, it is. One of the better week 1s we've seen.
Yeah, most week 1s.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the Clemson Georgia game. You've got 14-1 in Alabama and Miami.
And there's still some like going to be overlooked non-ranked games. I mean, you got Florida State, Notre Dame.
Yep.
I mean, you might have Mackenzie Milton coming back from UCF, transfer to Florida State. You got you got North Carolina and I believe, like I said, Virginia Tech.
Yep.
And that's going to be an underrated. That's going to be a good game.
This is a really good lineup in week 1. And the thing is here, most of the time we're used to FCS matchups.
Right. Exactly.
And
pretty much.
Teams are scheduling these bye games to really warm up.
To get started, yeah.
But like you said, 14-1.
Yeah.
You got 3-5.
12-19.
17-18.
With Wisconsin and Penn State.
And then then a few non-ranked games that have one ranked team and one non-ranked team. That's going to be more interesting. I think
this is like it feels like we're in week 11.
Yeah.
Right here.
It's one of the more. It's definitely one of the more loaded week 1s I can remember in a while.
Oh, no doubt. In my mind.
What do y'all think about Oklahoma State just being on the outside? So according to this, they missed it by 17 points.
I'm not 100% sure who all they returned and who all they lost, but I know they beat Miami last year in a bowl game.
Yeah.
And I watched that game, and Oklahoma State looked really good. Now, granted, De'Aaron King, that's the game he went down with a torn ACL.
Right.
But that definitely had an impact because it was a close game. But Oklahoma State, they really dominated the line of scrimmage in that game, and that's kind of what's most important. And I don't know who all they returned, but I mean, with Arizona State, with all the little scandal they got going on, it's pretty interesting to see them be the first team out.
Arizona State is always that kind of team that they seem to always have a couple of just really stars.
Right. Yeah,
but they always kind of seem to underwhelm.
Right. No, I agree.
And so I don't mind those two teams being out.
But like we said, this is definitely a solid top 25. There's definitely a few things that we would change, but as a whole, I believe it's a pretty strong top 25.
The biggest thing I don't like, I think Georgia's too low.
I agree.
And the biggest thing but the things I do like, Cincinnati, I think they got that right.
They got that right. North Carolina.
UNC is a top 10 team. Yeah. And you can argue whether 7 should be at 8 or whether 19 should be at wherever.
Right. But
minor things.
Time will play out.
Right. But and one thing I remember is these preseason polls don't hold much weight at all.
Right. It's not much.
Honestly, it wouldn't bother me if they didn't even do a first poll till week 4, week 5.
I agree with you.
And it's fun to look at.
Absolutely.
But I mean, it doesn't hold any weight.
It does absolutely nothing.
I did see a stat though. I think since I want to say 2010 or 2011, there's only been one team that's started the year number 1 and won the national championship, and that was Bama. I think in 17. Yeah.
17.
So it'd be interesting to see if the trend holds true.
Yeah.
It's almost like you don't want to be number 1.
Right, exactly.
I'm curious of what ranking seems to win it the most.
Yeah, that would be cool to look at.
Be something good to look at. But like we said, I think it's a solid poll.
I do too.
I'll have to be honest here. I was hoping for a number 2 versus number 3.
I was too.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie, I was too.
That'd have been nice. That'd have been nice. But 3 and 5 is still nice.
Right. And the thing is, if you argue Oklahoma's better on paper than Georgia, I can take that because they return a stud quarterback who's proven and consistently great offense. But and as I've said this before, Georgia and Oklahoma are complete opposite.
Right.
Georgia needs to get the offense going. Oklahoma needs to get the defense going. Whichever one does first, sooner or later, it's going to win a national championship.
Right.
I agree.
For sure.
But so, like we said, I think it's a solid ranking. There's some things I'd change, but overall, I'm not at odds. I'm not coming at sideways with anybody.
But thanks for watching, especially if you've watched all the way into this video. And be sure to leave a comment. Be sure to like, subscribe, and also share it. Share this video if you enjoyed it with your friends.
If you're still watching, say Cam Smith.
Yes, and share it with your friends, family if you enjoyed it. And honestly, if you watch this and you're like, man, I hated that video, send it with people you don't like. Share it with them and make them suffer as well.
Exactly.
We appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
But check out in the description on those things with the insurance and the radio there. But we thank you for watching. And
until next time, keep talking ball.